Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm still Giles Whittell, even though I've had a glass of wine since we last spoke. So this is a first for me. I don't generally do these things inebriated. This is a hybrid thinking in more ways than one. Our assignment is to make sense of cheap chicken, which is a big question in its own right, but it's also, as I'm sure we'll find out, a sort of microcosm of an even bigger one. We are joined by Shraddha Kaul, who is Director of External Affairs at British Poultry, or should I say the British Poultry Association? Council, forgive me. Shraddha, what do you make of that? If you're Angela, or indeed George Monbiot, who's just written a book with a chapter in which he walks rather than swims or sleeps the River Wye, he chooses that area as well to detail the effects of intensive poultry farming along the banks of that particular region. How has it come to this, and what is to be done from your perspective?
I think it's an interesting perspective that we got from Angela, and by the way, hats off to what she does every day and for the nation for protecting the countryside. A lot of respect for that. I think the nation's love affair with chicken has sort of grown over the years. This has not started overnight, or we're talking about from 40,000 to millions of birds. The country produces 1 billion birds every year. There is a big marketplace for chicken. We've all heard of the KFC chicken crisis, and I know there's someone from KFC in the room. I think there is a reason why all of that's happening, why MPs up and down the country were receiving calls when we ran out of chicken that day, over the next couple of days. There is a reason why the popularity is growing 3 to 4% every year. There is a reason why each one of us on average eats 23 to 26 kgs of chicken every year. And it is part of our staple diet, why it's so versatile, why it's affordable, why it's accessible, and why it has become the nation's favorite meat. The reason is that, the reason is that we grow it, at a scale, we happy and proud to call it intensive. We grow it at a scale that is, meeting the increasing demand, that is contributing to the popularity. But I think the main reason is that is creating jobs in this country, that is protecting animal health and welfare, that is committed to delivering high environmental standards. But most of all, I think the reason why we exist is to meet consumer demand and to make sure that we deliver a protein that is exactly what the consumer wants and wants on their table every single day.
Okay, well, let's put aside animal welfare for a moment, and that's a big subject to put aside, and let's just look at the health of places like the River Wye. Is that avoidable? Has there been just a simple catastrophic error in planning that has allowed dozens of intensive poultry farms to be located so close to the river that the river is effectively killed off? And could that be fixed with chicken still as cheap as it is?
I think first there's a little fact correction here. I think that, polluting the river and whatever's, the pollutants that have been found in the riverway is something that you need to look separately to, some of the litter that poultry production produces. Now, yes, we are, putting our hands up and definitely, saying, a number of businesses have explicitly said that up and down the country, that we are, one of the largest producers of phosphates for that matter. But the way it is managed, the waste management plan, we make sure that phosphate doesn't run into the river. It's not good for our birds, it's not good for our indoor production for that to happen at all. So there is a very careful management plan to make sure that that is not happening. It does contribute to a circular economy, and it is all in line with regulation and legislation. And we work very closely with DEFRA and the Environment Agency to make sure that does not happen.
Except that it is happening.
I think this is, again, something that needs to be looked at in detail to get to the bottom of exactly what is contributing to it. I think this is one piece of the jigsaw. chicken producers. I think there is agricultural production, there's domestic contributors as well as other factors, and I think this is not an issue that can be sort of handled from a very silo perspective. This is something which requires a lot of collaboration, working together, understanding, and getting to the bottom of the issue, rather than just talking based on a specific stereotype.
Okay. By the way, something that I should have said at the top and didn't is this is a think-in, which for anybody online or in the room who hasn't been to a think-in before means pile in at any point, raise your hand or raise your digital hand. I won't see the digital hand, but I will see the hands in the room, and I hope colleagues will see the digital hand, because there's not a Q&A thing at the end. We want to hear from you throughout. Was that a hand up I saw from you? No. Okay. But I'm sure there will be. But perhaps, since you have suggested that we need to be clearer about what is actually going on, we've got some hands up in the room. Shraddha, I want to give you a chance to come back on this. I accept it's not your fault. It's not the Poultry Council's fault that chicken is popular. It's not poultry manufacturers' fault that they're in a highly competitive business. But what would you say needs to be done to stop what is clearly an environmental disaster that our witness on the ground says with absolute confidence has one particular cause?
I think the one thing that surely needs to be done is, I think collaborating, as I said earlier. I think it is about holding hands. As an industry, we have always been very committed to hold hands, whether that's with DEFRA, whether that's Environment Agency, or campaigners like Angela, and making sure we do get to the bottom of some of those things, dig a bit deeper, find out what's happening, what the causes are, what industry can do, what residents can do, and also what government can do to fix any problems that there may be.
And do your members, that is this country's intensive poultry farmers, think that they could continue to produce chicken at the price that they produce it now if they were told, for example, you need to move your plants much further back from any river?
I think there's something to be said about the fact that this is, the poultry meat industry. The reason why, it has been existing and thriving all these years is not because of, any of the other things that have been said earlier, but because we are operating in not only a consumer-driven marketplace, but a highly regulated industry. You must sort of look at some of the regulation behind the everyday things that businesses operate to and adhere to. And I think those regulations and legislations are already there, and there's a very strict system of bells and whistles in place. So if anything goes wrong, you are, brought to attention, but also made sure that you are penalized at the right time for it. I think, again, complete sympathies with Angela in terms of her love for the river, but also her being a champion for the environment. I think, yes, there is scope for collaboration, and as an industry, we're always up for innovation and collaboration. We're never going to deny that.
You, sir, and then you, Bruce, if we can keep it relatively brief.
Yeah, could I just put a bit of context here? First, to that point, and I just want to make the point, my father pioneered industrial poultry production in this country. So here is a picture of his first fridge of chickens, 1956. And those chickens, they're very bony, they're long-legged. Before the geneticists got to work on them, they were processing 4,000 a week. We've now, before he died, he said, I never expected the growth of this industry to be exponential. What we're dealing with here is a runaway train. The power base that is trying to be defended very bravely by the PR at the front of the industry is backed by mega corporations, those companies in the Wye Valley that Angela are talking about. There are only about 3 of them globally. They are enormous. Their power is eye-watering. There are no politicians who can stand up to them. The Environment Agency can't. The Food Standards Agency can't. And all I can say is, because I've had a lifetime of seeing the industry develop, it is completely wrong that somebody says there are any regulators who can stop the power base of this industry. It is really, really rotten and dysfunctional, and it should be producing nutrients. It's not about how many chickens people buy. They are nutritionally of minimal value because of the way in which they're produced, and the whole industry is relentlessly squeezing on unit cost. The farmers get crushed. But to say there are regulators who have any control over it, I'm sorry, it is absolutely greenwashing or a smokescreen. It's not true. It is an unstoppable runaway train of big business.
It raises really interesting questions about the kind of government that we have. Bruce, and then we're going to need to go to California.
It was a quick point. A confession, I suppose. So I was involved in trying to make chicken nuggets feel like chicken. Early job, early days in my life. And the trick was that you needed 3 dyes because then they looked randomly shaped. If you had only 2 dyes, it looked like they were made in a factory. If you had 3 dyes, it looked like they were made on a farm and came from the things that
determine the colour of the meat.
No, the cut things that make the shape.
Oh, okay.
So think of them like a jelly mold, but just pushing through you don't want to know how they're made. It's reconstituted chicken. It's spongy in texture. And I think that's the point. I just wanted to ask whether, the framing around this idea of cheap chicken as an outcome, and agreeing with your point around, well, what are we, so we've got certain foods that are able to sort of dominate within our food system because they're inherently very profitable, and that allows them to push other foods away. I mean, in competition, but at some point these become almost like monopolies, and you could look at them that way, like they are a form of a monopoly on certain proteins. So they're dominant in the store. Why? Because they're very profitable to the store. They're dominant versus other meats because they are more profitable. They can invest in the marketing. They can invest in people like me to come up with clever ways of making them look natural. And I think that we're sort of talking about, there is the production, there is the impact of the production, but there's actually a lot of this is about what happens around the production. It's the know-how to make it appear attractive. So how do you make a chicken look attractive in an advert? You put a tampon behind it and put hot water on it so it's steaming, because the actual chicken doesn't look very good on photographs. So that's the technology we're talking about here that's made it dominant. Yes, it's also, there's the industrialization of farming, and that's one problem. But cheap chicken is driven by marketing. And so there's 2 critiques here you could have. One of them is the process of branding and marketing chicken versus other proteins, alternative or otherwise, versus what we're talking about here, which is the industrialization and the impact of industrialization, which frankly could be any industrial process that's near the wire. And there are other things like a Xerox factory and things like that. So there's a question there about what are you critiquing there with cheap chicken? Is it because it's not cheap, it's marketed to make you feel like you're getting good value. That's why people buy it, not because it's cheap. They feel they're getting value for money, whatever price it's at. And that's done through marketing. It's not rocket science. That's why we eat so much chicken.
Okay, I admit I eat quite a lot of it because I like it. How expensive should chicken be? Now, the first hand I saw up was over here, and there was another one at the back there, and we can come here and right here at the front. If you don't want to, that's fine. But if you want to say,
hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm from the Food Standards Agency, and I'm not going to give you a regulator's perspective on the chicken farming. Actually, we get involved at the abattoir point. I was actually going to talk about the consumer perspective, because one of our jobs is to protect consumer interests. And I'm so torn on this, because you hear this discussion and you think, yes, we should all be paying more for chicken. But we're also currently living in a world where 1 in 6 households use the food bank in the last month. And 1 in 5 people tell us that they've cut down the size of their meals because they can't afford food. So anything that increases the price of food for consumers really risks, I think, getting into this kind of elite foods divide that Jeevan was starting to talk about. And if we are looking at increases in the price, I think that as a sort of policy solution, it can only be one part of the puzzle. It's really, really heartening to hear about alternative proteins coming through. We're very interested because we're the organisation that would have to approve some of the alternative proteins that count as sort of novel foods for sale in the UK. But there's a lot of sort of consumer confusion and worry about them. Plant-based people see as a lot more acceptable, but when you get into lab-grown meat or other protein sources like insects, you have a long way to go to persuade consumers that it's safe and it's something that they want to put anywhere near their mouths. So I don't have a solution, but I think it's really important that we remember that tranche of people when we're thinking about what we're trying to do as the solutions here, and we don't end up pricing it out of the market or pricing all protein sources out of the market for a group of people who are also being influenced. They're primarily being influenced by price, but they also have very, very little agency in choosing food.
Yes, at the back.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, nutrition is the elephant in the room here, and I'm glad that it came up properly, so it's been touched on. The fact is that if you've got intensively farmed chicken with poor nutrition, it leads to overconsumption. This is a real problem. So one of the key problems we've got at the moment is that there's no label I can turn to that tells me whether this chicken provides enough nutrition for my family for a week versus this nutrition. The other thing I can't see at the moment is whether or not there's an alternative protein product which will compete nutritionally, and maybe that's a choice I want to make, but I don't get the truth about the nutritional impact of the alternative product. There's a lot of question marks around alternative proteins at the moment because of the intellectual property secrecy around them. So there's quite a lot we don't know about what we're putting in our body when it comes to these alternative proteins. So that's just something that we have to be keeping an eye on from a policy-making perspective, of course, as they come on the market. So this relationship between the environment and nutrition really has to be explored. There's some really exciting academic work going on where this sort of symbiosis of life cycle assessments looks at the relationship between environment and nutrition. But this needs to be brought, throw money at this, everybody, and make sure that the results of that work start finding their way onto labels for us so that we can make informed choices. This is something we don't have access to at the moment. And that's the only way that consumers will be able to make informed choices about how to spend what little money they have. The fact is, we mentioned, true cost accounting earlier. I think if people knew that this was destroying the environment, destroying the future of their children, they would think twice about really what the value of that chicken was. And they, again, would probably seek a label that would give them the opportunity to ask themselves whether, one good chicken a week that costs a bit more is actually a choice that they would like to make. But currently, this choice is not available to consumers.
Okay, we'll come to you and Phoebe in just a second. But Shraddha, since you've been good enough to join us here, what's your response? It's somewhat brutal, isn't it? Your industry is being accused of destroying the environment. Do you? And you've said that you think we need to take a more, let me put it like this, holistic view of that problem. But do you accept that the way things are currently set up, in this country at least, with, as you suggested, a pretty powerless executive, that something's a bit wrong?
I think I would like to come to Celia's point first in terms of the alternative meats, and I think there's a place for everything in the marketplace. However, I do believe imitation is a form of flattery. So I think the fact that they are trying to get as close as possible to a taste of chicken does say quite a lot about the nation's love affair. I would also, there was mention of soy, and I think the industry is quite unfairly accused at times about environmental impact and emissions and whatnot. And I don't know how many of you are aware of, the carbon footprint side of things and CO2 emissions. We are the only meat with the lowest CO2 emissions that's produced. But also, if you per kilogram, and if you compare that with soy, so chicken 0.5 kilogram per kg, and for soy it's 6.6 kilogram, if I'm not wrong, but definitely above 5. And I think there is that side of things that needs to be looked and explored. And I think businesses up and down the country are investing in the sort of research and development that was mentioned by the audience member here, in terms of working with universities, working and collaborating with research and development bodies to make sure that the nutrition side of things is as easily available and accessible, because we are all for, making sure that the consumer has got all the knowledge that they need, because we are the backbone of food security in this country, and there's no reason why we wouldn't want to sort of be proud and loud about all the nutritional benefits of the chicken that we produce. Coming back to the point that a colleague from the FSA made about food poverty, about I would call it food dignity, really, something that is really incredibly close to my heart. We've faced the biggest crisis of our lifetime in some unprecedented times. The thing that has kept the nation fed all this long, we cannot underestimate the power of food. We cannot underestimate the power of putting food on every table. There is an elite movement going down in this country.
The biggest crisis of our lifetime.
COVID. And we cannot underestimate the power of food. And there is definitely, and someone rightly pointed out, there is an elite movement going on in this country. There's the aspirational side of higher and higher wealth, aspirational side of different forms of protein. But how much of that actually translates to the supermarket shelves? How much of that actually translates or works with what people can genuinely afford and are willing to pay for is very different.
Thank you. We do need to get at what's actually gone wrong in regulatory terms. Let's come to you and then to you, Peter. I promise.
It's just been mentioned as well, but I wanted to just highlight the double whammy of why chicken is so cheap as well, that actually it relies on imported soy coming from the Amazon rainforest, the Cerrado in Brazil, lovely tropical areas of Peru, Argentina. And we rely as the UK on an area the size of Wales in those countries just to bring in our soy that goes into animal feed. So very much appreciate your point about chicken is the lowest in terms of meat, but it's relying on soy, which we could eat as direct protein and we're not. So we're losing protein through the value chain. So I think that's the double whammy. Cheap chicken, we're not just destroying the environment here that Angela's trying to protect, we're also destroying the environment in other countries.
Thank you. Peter.
We produce thousands of chickens a week, not millions, but we are servicing a customer base who understand the difference between value and price. And I think the point Katie makes about people not being able to afford food is a very well-made point. But we've had a shop in Exeter for 23 years with 600 customers a week coming through the door. I know they did not necessarily have a lot of money. And if their weekly budget was £5, that's what they'd spend. They'd buy our chicken carcasses and make bone broth. And they understood they needed to be buying nutritional value. And that's the point it was mentioned earlier. We must not lose sight here that our job as farmers is to produce nutrient-dense food, and it is to factor in all the costs, true cost accounting, the damage being done in the Wye Valley, that should be factored in. So these cheap chicken are not cheap, but our customers who might spend £14 to buy a whole chicken, I know they will be actually paying about £1 per portion for nutrient-dense food because they definitely won't waste any of it. And these are the real facts. That means these industrial poultry supply chains are not the way to feed the world. They don't have to be. We need to go back to what Angela was talking about, a farming system closer to nature, respect for nature, respect for the livestock, but producing food in harmony with nature that's nutrient dense. That is good value food, not cheap food.
Understood. But Peter, in your alternative scenario, which is real, I understand, isn't it the case that chicken has become a bit of an elite food because it's the well-off people who can buy the whole chicken, and the poor, the less well-off people who have to make do with portions or broth?
But but make do with portions or broth. That's not there's nothing wrong with it. It's good, wholesome, nutrient-dense food. People don't have to buy a whole chicken. And this is the point. Education is a critical part of this whole discussion. We need young children to go back to some of those skills that previous generations had of how to make food that is good value. And so you don't have to buy a whole chicken off a supermarket shelf for £2. And our customers understand that they eat less meat, but when they buy meat, they are getting good value because they're putting good nutrition in their body. It's wrong to say we've got to start from where we are and there's no way of going back, to help people understand how to actually cook and prepare food that is good for their bodies, but it's good value and there's no waste, that's for certain.
What's a fair and sustainable and affordable price for a chicken?
Well, probably one of our chickens is, as I say, whole.
It's not 14 quid.
It might be, okay, but our customers would not necessarily say, we're going to go out and buy a whole chicken for £14, but they'll say, we'll buy what we can afford out of that supply chain. And that's the difference. There's got to be a fundamental rethink of the supply chain without the dominance of these big global corporates, as has been mentioned several times. They're the winners in this. It's definitely not those farmers in the Wye Valley. They will be under intense pressure. It's like a relentless pressure to do more and more for less and less. That's not sustainable.
I didn't want to miss the opportunity, since we have someone from KFC in the room, of asking what you'll do if the price of what you would do or what you are doing as consumers ask for more non-meat products and as the price potentially goes up.
So the war on Ukraine has been a really good example of that, as to where prices have rocketed. I'm sure you all will have seen that in the supermarket. It's obviously been reported on quite substantially, and that's hit across the board from McDonald's to ourselves. So I guess that will be an interesting test base to see what the kind of customer appetite to pay more for chicken will be, and how that will be maintained or declined within sales, or whether people might even switch into alternative proteins, whether that be beef or lamb, because poultry has been adversely affected in terms of price from that perspective. So it's kind of an interesting test base, I guess, over the next sort of year to 18 months in terms of where that price point is for the customer and what they are prepared to pay. In terms of what we're doing as sustainability as a business, we've committed to move towards sustainable soy by 2025, which will be deforestation and conversion free. We've also committed
as a feed for your chicken.
As a feed for our chicken, yeah.
Right.
So both within our embedded and our ingredient soy. So both in terms of our the feed and chicken and any raw soy products we have in, particularly it's in sauces primarily. And then additionally to that, we've signed up to the Better Chicken Commitment, which I just wanted to talk about a little bit as well. So
briefly, because I do want to.
Yeah, sorry. The Better Chicken Commitment is a sort of standard that's been put forward, which is mainly about welfare, but does also take into consideration looking to produce chicken in a more sustainable way. And I think it's important to say that farmers want to do their best by sustainability and by the industry. And actually want to produce to a higher standard, but we mentioned about policy and the sort of commercial factors that we're living in, and education. I take that point as well. All of those things need to be addressed in order for us to move towards that as an industry. I think we're all in the same place, whether we be a large corporate, which I guess you'd define us as, or whether you are an individual farmer, but we need to find collective ways of doing that. And policy is a big part of that. It's a huge part of that. The other thing I just wanted to mention, which is a whole new topic, so maybe I shouldn't, but was just exporting our footprint and our impact. If we don't produce it within the UK, and I take the point about our regulation is not as perhaps robust as it should be, but my gosh, it's a damn sight better than a lot of other countries out there. And if we're not going to produce it, who is? And we just need to be really careful about that as well. We do have a site in this country on sustainability, and it is part of the conversation. In a lot of countries, it isn't. So, yeah.
Thank you all very much for coming.